by going to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. The Conservative Member of Parliament for Finchley and Golders Green, Mike Freer, has announced he will not be putting himself forward to stand at the next election. He cites Muslims against Crusades harassing him year after year. He cites the fact that Ali Harbi Ali visited his office. This is the man who went on to murder the Southend Member of Parliament, Sir David Amess. And in December, there was an arson attack on his office. And he feels that whilst you're an MP, you have to accept some pretty rough stuff, that it's now reaching a level that threatens him and his immediate family. And my real concern with this is what we're seeing is sectarianism, religious violence and sectarianism in British politics. Now, I probably know more about threats, intimidation and assaults than anyone that's been around in modern British politics. I was physically assaulted many, many times. But my way round it was that I had to have a team of security people physically with me when I was out campaigning. Because, you see, we don't want our elected representatives to be completely separated from the public. We want them to go out to street markets or whatever it is, talk to the public, get the mood. But I don't think it's viable for MPs to go on doing this without having security protection with them. That is my view. Oh, I can hear you at home. I can hear you saying it'll cost too much money. I can hear you saying, no, surely it's their job to protect us. But I promise you, if people are frightened of going into politics because of the physical threats they could face, especially if they're defenders of Israel, especially in the case of Mike Freer, if they're openly declared to be gay, if those sort of people are put off going into politics, we will perhaps find the quality of those in politics diminished even further. And for those that are elected, they'll be scared to speak out on issues that really matter. So I believe MPs need more protection. I'd love to get your point of view. I'm sure they'll be mixed. Farage at gbnews.com. Now, earlier on, Mike Freer spoke to Christopher Hope, our political editor.
Point when the level of threat becomes, if like beyond the pale. Most MPs, in fact, I think all MPs have to cope with a level of routine abuse, routine graffiti, that the kind of low-level stuff. Maybe we shouldn't have to deal with it, but it is kind of bread and butter now, the way we handle our jobs as MPs. So the arson attack, it was simply the last straw. I've had two run-ins with Muslims against Crusades, one quite serious where they burst into a surgery I was having in a mosque and threatened me. And the common theme there seems to me my support for Israel. In fact, Muslim against Crusades, when they burst in, said you're a Jewish homosexual pig. I can't deny, I do believe that there is a linkage to anti-Semitism. But now where I'm in public, standing on the pavement where I do an advice fair where 200 or 300 residents come through the door, I now wear a stab vest. Also, my staff also have them available if they want to wear them.
Did you worry if you were re-elected as an MP in the election, you wouldn't survive the Parliament?
It's always at the back of your mind. It's getting worse. The level of abuse in the inbox is getting worse. The level of threats now on the street are getting worse. The threats to life are what's become more, more frequent. And the inbox, someone after the fire said, you're clearly the kind of person that deserves to be set alight. Well, as if it was just words, yeah. But you just don't know whether someone will be on the street corner with a knife. Or, no. We've had a mock Molotov cocktail left on the front doorstep. Gosh. You're worried, or your family's worried, are you going to survive the day? Are you going to come home if you walk the streets? Then I think there's time to say that's enough.
Well, that's where we are. I'm joined to discuss this with Lord John Mann, independent advisor to the UK government on anti-Semitism and former long-term Labour MP, and Mohammed Amin, co-chair of the Muslim Jewish Forum of Greater Manchester and former chair of the Conservative Muslim Forum. Gentlemen, welcome. John, you have spoken out consistently, loudly, about anti-Semitism over many years. And whilst you were an MP, you were subject, and your family were subject to threats.
Oh, many times. People jailed, people with suspended sentences, people with harassment orders, with convictions, others who should have been prosecuted and, in my view, jailed. And that's against me, my staff, my family, my wife, my daughters, And it does. It unnerves you far more, I think, when it's your family. What do you do when your daughter's going around a normal business and she's rung up by the police to say, well, there's a specific threat being made and here's what you need to do? Or when your son opens the door and the bomb squad's there as a teenager. And so what Mike's done... people like you and I have a little bit of a reputation for speaking out.
Yes.
Mike was known in Parliament as a true gentleman. Not meek, but very polite, very, very collegiate. One of the nicest people you'd come across. When someone like him is standing down, the country needs to stop and think, because it's endangering the future of civilization in the country. That's what it's really doing. Of course, it's endangering Parliament and democracy, but it's deeper, because there are people, the mob rule or the individual or organised extremists think they can wield power by taking some of us out. And those who speak out are probably more at risk of something, but Mike proves.
Of course.
Mike was a consistent champion of fighting anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
His reputation cross-party has been a good local MP. One Labour knew it would be hard to get rid of because people will be voting for him, not necessarily because he was a Tory, they're a bit unpopular at the moment.
But they like him.
And they trust him, and he delivered for them. And for him to go, it's a warning. It's a warning to the country. Well,
it is, and let's call it for what it is. These are threats coming from extreme Islamists, aren't they?
Oh, that's what's been targeted him, and I can't reveal some of the stuff going on at the moment. But yes, I'm having to take lots of extra precautions, and I've got to make sure, if not me, who else will they go for? Yeah. And who are these people? Because they don't come and identify themselves. No. Send you a little note saying this is me. Locally, you might get those kind of idiots, but you know them. You see that, and you can manage
the regulars.
You can manage them.
Yeah.
And also in London. London's a big place. Yeah. How does Mike know who's walking down his street? If it's where I live, someone unusual walking down, who's that then?
Yeah, not in London.
Not in London.
No, Mohammed, this is a very depressing picture, isn't it?
It is.
Here is, and I think the point John Mann makes that Mike Freer was not a particularly, not that it should even happen to high-profile, controversial people, but, this looks to me, although radical Islam is reshaping our politics in a very negative way.
And not just radical Islam. Remember, we've had 2 MPs murdered in the last sort of 8 years. David Amis, murdered by an extremist Muslim. Jo Cox, murdered by a far-right campaigner for her political views. It is terrible. And what we have to do is dial down the rhetoric in our society, stop calling judges enemies of the people. What's happening in Gaza has inflamed passions, but as the Muslim Jewish Forum of Greater Manchester, we have been categorical on the point that nobody, whether they're Jewish or Muslim, should allow what they feel about what's happening in Israel and Palestine to give rise to hostility against other people in this country.
When you say dial down the rhetoric, do you mean we should have limits put on our ability to speak freely on issues?
Well, we should certainly, first of all, consider ourselves what kind of language we are using. When a major national newspaper calls judges enemies of the people, somebody is liable to take a pot shot at them.
Well, I can assure you that in politics, all sorts of things get said. A lot of things have been said about me, a lot of things have been said about John over the years, but none of that is an excuse for violence. And you're quite right about Jo Cox's murderer, but if you look at the big concerns that the authorities have in this country, 80% of them are coming from suspected Islamists. When is the Muslim religion itself going to try and sort this out?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't be at all surprised to find that right now, with what's going on in Israel and Palestine, the majority of threats are coming from Muslim extremists. That wasn't the case a few years ago when the security services felt that the majority of threats were coming from the far right.
Well, they don't believe that now. It's 80% is the figure now. All right, that's where we are today. And that's before the Gaza conflict. I mean, I'm going to repeat the question.
Yeah.
You know, I know that with the Catholic Church we have a Pope, and with the Church of England we have an Archbishop, and things are not as straightforward in the Muslim religion, and I get that. But I don't hear talk amongst your religious leaders in this country saying they're going to try and sort this stuff out.
Well, one of the things I did a few years ago, I got fed up of people saying that Muslims don't condemn terrorism, for example. So I started for a while keeping a log on my website of Muslim condemnations of terrorism, because it gets said regularly Muslims are not speaking up. Muslims are speaking up, but don't get very much attention when they do.
All right. Well, I promise you that on this channel, when they do, we will make sure they get coverage.
I mean, I'm prepared to sit here right now and condemn these extremists.
I'm hearing
as long
you,
as
and
want.
and I'm pleased to hear it.
Yep.
John, MPs at the moment have a degree of protection, panic buttons, CCTV in their homes. Certain of them can get protection when they're doing surgeries. Do they actually need physical security now to go about their work and to walk around the streets of London?
Some probably need it and want it, but I'd never want it where I live.
No.
Because that ability to talk to the voters is so fundamental. And, you know, when you deal... mine was a former mining area. People say what they think, and they don't necessarily hold back. And, you know, I'd go in and people would read me the Riot Act and they'd be effing and blinding and pointing their finger, stamping, you know, and I'm kind of shuffling back. You know, the dogs are suddenly coming out as well. And then they'd say at the end, oh, don't worry, we'll still vote for you, John. but that way you know them.
Yeah. Yeah.
But how do you know when you're in a big city and you don't know
Well, that's the point I'm making.
And I think the more visible, the more it's needed.
Yeah.
And, you know, all my staff and me, we got someone in ex-army and we got trained in what to do in terms of a knife attack, including how to deal with knife wounds. And that was serious level stuff, because we looked and thought, what's the most rational danger? And what can we do something about?
Yeah.
What might happen?
Yeah.
And I think the way in which MPs are not being protected in their surgeries is solvable.
Yeah, because it's publicly
And
advertised.
security around Parliament is solvable.
Yeah.
And it's
Well,
it's a weakness that the extremists are exploiting. If I can say, congratulations on having a Muslim-Jewish forum. We need more people talking together. And look, if you want to argue about the politics all day long in the forum, fine.
We don't
but
do
you're drawing a line between the Democrats and the extremists. And I think we're going to need to do far more of that in this country, Nigel. Who are the Democrats?
We need a
and
lot
who are
more of
the
it.
anti-Democrats who don't believe in democracy and therefore are going to target the elected politicians?
Coming back to Muslims
We
Against
need
Crusades,
people.
They were, if that's the same organisation that existed in the mid-2000s, they were banned by the government. Why are they actually not being prosecuted?
No, look, there are lots of questions around this, but thank you, gentlemen, both for joining me. And this is a very, very important debate. I just hate to think there'll be more Mike Freers. I hate to think there'll be more good people not going into public service because they're scared. In a moment, we will discuss the acid attack that took place yesterday in Clapham. We'll also ask, following Mark Zuckerberg's appearance before a Senate committee yesterday, is it time to ban smartphones from under 16s?
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So, should MPs be better protected? Some of your thoughts. John says, I agree that members of Parliament should be provided with protection. You're right, it won't be cheap. Cultural conflicts never are. My wife and I are actively encouraging our son and his young family to emigrate to a safer country. It's all so depressing. Grace says, MPs and journalists should be protected. Pay for it by abolishing the House of Lords and taking protection from junior royals. I don't think it's an either or, Grace. I think the junior royals need protection too. And finally, Tony says, it's OK giving MPs protection, but where is the protection for us, the public, who will be paying for this? And look, Tony, I understand whenever we talk about spending more money on MPs, it is quite often very, very unpopular. Now, yesterday, a Senate hearing with many of the big tech bosses from the West Coast in America, including, of course, Mark Zuckerberg. And I have to say, when it came to the threats posed to young, underage people on the internet, a variety of threats, senators in the USA were not holding back when they spoke to Zuckerberg yesterday.
Do you know who's sitting behind you? You've got families from across the nation whose children are either severely harmed or gone, and you don't think it's appropriate to talk about steps that you took? The fact that you didn't fire a single person? Let me ask you this. Have you compensated any of the victims?
Sorry?
Have you compensated any of the victims? These girls, have you compensated them?
I don't believe so.
Well, it's pretty full-on stuff, and it leads to a debate. Should we say under-16s can't have smartphones and can't have full access to the internet? Is that desirable? Is it possible? Well, I'm joined down the line by Miriam Cates, Member of Parliament, Conservative for Penistone and Stocksbridge. And Miriam, you were speaking out about this the other day. You're very concerned about the content that's being seen by a lot, in fact, a majority of young people. What action would you like us to take as a society?
Well, good evening, Nigel. Well, I think it's become increasingly clear that social media, access to social media for children, for young teenagers, has had some fairly horrific consequences. I think it's clear now after about 10 or 12 years of this being ubiquitous for children that suicides have gone up, mental health problems have gone up, self-harm has gone up, addiction to pornography has gone up, all sorts of horrific things that our children are seeing each and every day. And I think there was a study out just last week that showed that the average British teen spends 2 hours a day on TikTok. And I think we've seen from the congressional hearings today that even the social media bosses now are begrudgingly admitting, or at least their emails are showing that they know that there is a strong link between social media and very poor consequences for our children. And so I think what I would like to see is restrictions on social media so that under 16s are not allowed to use social media. Now, at the moment, in theory, under 13s are not supposed to have social media accounts, but we all know it's very easy to break any kinds of controls on those platforms. Now, if a ban on social media for under 16s didn't prevent the kind of harms we're seeing, then I do think we should look at a smartphone ban because, of course, smartphones also do have access to the internet. But I think social media seems to be the key driver of those harms at the moment, and that is where we should focus our efforts.
All right, Miriam, you've made the case. Thank you. I'm not sure it's practical, but I understand the reasons why you put it across with that passion, and thank you for giving us that point of view this evening. I'm also joined on this debate by Professor Andy Meir, Chair of Science Communications and Future Media at the University of Salford. Andy, you heard what Miriam had to say. You understand why she's saying it. She's genuinely concerned about what young people are seeing. We're all concerned about what young people are seeing and some of the awful consequences. To me, I just don't think it's practical.
Well, I agree with you, Nigel. I do think that it's impractical to ban mobile phones and ban social media, and all these strategies to try to deal with the problem, I think, are a bit too heavy-handed. We need to look at really how to educate people, how to empower teachers and parents to develop more healthy relationships through digital media with their children. And if we look at the medical profession, the Royal College for Paediatrics and Child Health or the American Academy of Paediatrics, none of them are calling for a ban. Neither is the teaching profession. So I think we need to look at other strategies before we go down the route of any kind of ban at all.
And how much harm, how much genuine harm? We hear of the extreme cases, and they're ghastly and they're awful, and they were lined up, those families, behind Zuckerberg in the Senate yesterday. But how much genuine harm do you think is being done to young minds?
Well, I think that, again, the evidence suggests it's a very mixed bag, and actually social media can provide a great deal of support from many young people. So taking it away can actually put them in a more vulnerable position. These figures are always disputed, and I think that, again, the medical professions look at this in a very broad perspective and see that, in fact, we need to understand the complexity of these things. I think for me, a big part of it is actually we've built a history of social media where often parents are separated from the environments that children are experiencing, often don't know them themselves, and are terribly uninvolved with their activities. So I'd love to see more empowerment, parents getting involved with the lives of their children in digital spaces, and teachers who are crying out for more support to deal with this in the classroom as well, but not through a ban, but through education, through building programs of building digital resilience are crucial, I think, for kids.
Yeah, I think the point, Andy, is quite a strong one, that kids always want to develop their own lives away from their parents, but now they can develop lives that are so far away their parents don't even comprehend it. Thank you very much indeed for joining me this evening on the programme. Well, a couple of very clear points of view there, folks. I absolutely understand Miriam's sincerity. I just think banning things for under 16s, frankly, isn't going to work. Now, a lot of talk ahead of the March the 6th budget about tax cuts. One moment, the Chancellor hinting maybe he's going to cut taxes. Then we hear the IMF and others saying, no, you mustn't do that. And now the Chancellor says, well, there isn't really very much room, but who knows? Maybe he will produce something of a rabbit out of the hat. I don't know. But I'm going to ask Kwasi Kwarteng in a minute, former Chancellor of the Exchequer, given the size of our annual deficit and the massive growth of our debt under 14 years of Conservatives, is it actually prudent to be cutting taxes at all?
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who we trust to run the economy, to look after the nation's finances, is always one of the key determinants of how we vote at general elections. But there's a debate I just don't think we've been having, and that is the extent to which our national debt has exploded over the course of the last few years. Have a look at this graph on your screen. And OK, we know that going back to 2007, 8, 9, there were some really quite big bailouts that came from central government to bail out the banks. We equally know that in the pandemic, huge amounts of money were borrowed. But even if you take that away, you can see that every single year, the size of our national debt gets bigger. It is now about £2.8 trillion, going up every year. And in that context, some people are saying, well, actually, we can't really afford to cut taxes at all. Well, who better to speak to than a tax-cutting chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng?
Hello.
Kwasi, we are progressively getting poorer and poorer as a nation.
That's right. So the way to get out of this, and that was what I tried to do and Liz Truss tried to do, is you've got to focus on growth. That's the exam question that we have to answer. And the way that you get growth, lots of people have different ideas, but principally a conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses, can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly right. And then people, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you, and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to explain.
But it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So when you're slowing the increase, it means 1 year you spend £100, and the next year you spend maybe £101, as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase, and that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done, was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen.
That's right.
To the highest since the Attlee government, way back in
80 years, 70
1951,
years,
whatever it is. And we've now got a general election coming up, and I'm struggling, Kwasi, to see any real difference in economic policy between the Conservatives and the Labour Party?
Well, I've written about this. I wrote to the Telegraph about this, and I don't see how we can go into the election essentially saying we're going to be just like Labour. We're going to put up your taxes just as they are. I don't understand what that...
to be fair, Labour are saying we won't put up your taxes.
Well, yeah, I mean, Labour, so we've got a sort of slightly absurd situation where the Labour Party opposing... We all know it's nonsense, because when they get in, they'll say, oh, the books are such, we've got to whack up taxes.
Tony Blair, hang on. Tony Blair kept the top rate of tax at 40p all the way through those years.
He did. So we're in a situation where, arguably, Labour could present themselves as the party of low tax, which is incredible. I mean, if you think about, you know, the history, the political history, where the parties have come from, it would be very odd, and I think very bad for the Conservatives, if Labour opposed themselves as the party of low tax.
On that point, stay with me, Kwasi. I'm joined down the line by Bill Rammell, former Labour Minister. Bill, good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
What a fascinating day. The Labour Party present to 400 businesses. We've had the boss of Iceland endorsing Labour. And we've had Rachel Reeves standing up and saying 25% on corporation tax is the correct balance, so we're not going to put up corporation tax, something the business community wanted to hear. The so-called bankers' bonuses, we're not going to change the relaxation of rules on that. And, I quote, the next Labour government will make the pro-business choice and the pro-growth choice. Is this enough, Bill Rammell, to convince people that Labour will not be a tax and spend party?
Well, I think it's part of what we need to do. And, you know, throughout the new Labour years, we did position ourselves and we were convincing as being the party of business. And certainly the Tories over the last 14 years have lost that reputation, you know, with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, talking about effing business and things like that. So I think we are positioning ourselves correctly. We're making it clear that we're not going to tax and spend for the sake of it. We're making it clear that we've got the highest tax burden since the Second World War, and that's not a position the Labour Party wants to be in. And we're making it clear that more than anything, we want to give stability to business to create the conditions for economic growth, which is absolutely essential for a fully functioning society and decent public services.
So this really is the Blair 97 campaign 2.0, isn't it?
I mean, it's not the same. We're in a very different set of circumstances, and you know, it's not an identikit new Labour, but it's certainly a Labour Party which is centred in the centre ground of British politics, which knows that you need a strong and a positive relationship between government and business to drive the economy and creating the conditions for a successful economy.
But you will tax those who are non-doms, you will tax those who choose to send their kids to private school. Those at the higher end of the income scale do have some interfere, don't they?
Well, there are going to be some symbolic changes which are about fairness. So billionaires, non-dom, non-payers at the moment, we will end that status and put that money into the health service. We'll levy VAT fees on private school fees and put that money into state schools. But beyond that, we are making it very clear that what we need to fund improvements in public services is economic growth. And that means planning reform, it means a major house building programme, it means stability for business and the country, and it means a restoration of confidence. And you know, all those things we did achieve in 13 years of Labour government. If you look at the figures, the average growth rate under the last Labour government was 2%. Under this government, it's been 1.5%. That difference is worth about £150 billion. That's the difference between Labour in power and the last 14 years of the Tories.
Bill Rammell, thank you. Going to come back to you, Kwasi. Very interesting there. Very interesting.
It was interesting.
I mean, there's Labour, there's Bill Rammell, experienced guy, former minister, saying that the tax burden is too high.
He's right.
And they have an emphasis on growth.
That's right.
What is the difference between your two parties?
Well, I think that the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. If they do win,
I'm talking about the choice, facing electors.
So, look, it's only 5 years ago, 6 years ago, that they had Jeremy Corbyn, 5 years ago, as the leader. So you know there are lots of people in the Labour Party who stood on his platform, which was not the centrist Labour Party, in inverted commas, that we see now. And you've got to ask yourself, if they do get into power, and they've got a slim majority or they don't have a majority at all, who is actually going to be calling the shots in a Labour government? It won't be Bill Rammell. I mean, he's not in Parliament anymore. It'll be a radicalised bunch of quite left-wing MPs who will want to tax the rich, who will want to put up people's taxes in a confiscatory way.
I guess it'll depend on the size of it. If he has a majority, a big majority, the hard left aren't going to hurt him. A small majority...
The hard left, he will have to answer that.
You may well be right. Kwasi, thank you very much indeed. And just a quick thought. Farmers' protest today, heading to Brussels, surrounding the European Parliament. And this is happening right across our continent. Tell you what, folks, these people really mean it. Net zero, terribly popular in capital cities and amongst the governing classes and champagne socialists and, well, the modern Conservative Party too. But when it comes to who actually pays for net zero, no, the folks don't like it very much at all. Now, an astonishing win for the English cricket team last week. In fact, Michael Vaughan saying it was the greatest victory he'd seen in his lifetime. We're going to talk to former Derbyshire and England Test cricketer Jeff Miller, OBE, talking to him about his days playing cricket, how the game has changed, and what is this magic that Ben Stokes appears to have found.
On Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, forced to quit the job he loves after death threats from Islamist extremists and an arson attack, Tory MP Mike Freer is live in my studio. The manhunt is underway for a vile alleged acid attacker. I speak to one acid attack victim about their struggles. I'm also joined by renowned podcaster Konstantin Kisin. Are we seeing a rise of sectarian politics in Britain and cultural issues after one girl was prevented from going to Pakistan for an arranged marriage, aged just 13 years old? It's a brand spanking new Patrick Christie's tonight. It's 9 to 11 p.m. Be there.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests, and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's my favourite part of the show. Yes, it's Talking Pints. I'm joined by Jeff Dusty Miller, OBE. Jeff, welcome to
Nigel.
Talking Pints. Good to have you here.
Pleasure. Pleasure to be here.
Now, cricket, back in the news. England, this win last week, and we did cover it on the show and talk about it, and it was quite funny because I showed the newspaper headlines from Friday and Saturday. You know, Stokes' captaincy is a disaster, he's made all the wrong decisions, England are going to get thrashed, and suddenly Michael Vaughan is saying, wow, this is the best Test win he's ever seen, you know, in his lifetime. You played back in the day when with Botham and amazing figures that you played with.
But the game has dramatically changed, though, Nigel, now, because, well, for argument's sake, the bowlers, when we play the game, put pressure on the batsman. That's it, and you have to fight that pressure as a batsman. The game has changed so dramatically now that the batsmen, because of invention and creation of shots, etc., put pressure on the bowlers now. So the game has changed so much.
And the bats are different. I mean, these days, sixes seem terribly easy.
The weight's the same, but they don't press the bats now. If you talk to the bat manufacturers, they will tell you they don't press the bats, so they've got a kind of elasticity about them. So it pings off, you know, but the weight's the same. And I suppose the boys are a bit stronger. They're certainly stronger than I was when I played.
I mean, you played under Mike Brearley.
I did.
Who was a legendary captain.
Special.
And, you know, you were there through some amazing years and epic tussles with, the, you know, Australia and West Indies when you started, all of those things. You know, Mike Brearley was a very establishment figure, but clearly commanded great respect amongst you guys, the players. Ben Stokes, very different personality.
Different
figure, and yet somehow it looks to me like he's providing inspirational leadership.
Well, he's obviously working with the coach as well, so they've made their interpretation of how they want to play the game. They want the positivity about it. This is how we're going to take the game to the opposition. We're not going to play as the opposition want us to play. They've got to play how we are playing. And at this moment in time, it's been demonstrative. They've actually made it work.
Well, I tell you what, I will be up at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning. I'll have the telly on. I'll be watching the second Test match against India. And there's a general excitement around cricket. And yet, Jeff, what I think is so sad is there are so many schools that are just not playing cricket.
There are.
And increasingly, the England cricket team has become for those that have been to private school.
Yes, but there could be a worry that even starts to get stopped because of the private school situation. You know, that's not dominating everything now at the moment. You know, you're in politics, so you know that situation.
There is a threat.
But it's how you learn the game now, and they're taught to play in the modern era. So once upon a time you played respectful of the ball that was bowled at you.
Not anymore.
Now they go and invert and create, are inventive, right from the word go. That's the modern game. That's what the modern spectator wants to see.
Sports change. All I'm saying is I just feel there are too many, you know, youngsters, teenagers, maybe not getting access to cricket.
There probably are, but they can still make that. They can make that choice. But whereas the schools took that on, now the local clubs have to take on that mantle. You know, if a youngster wants to play, it's not just ordinary from a school. He goes to a local club, and they have to get coaches in to actually work on these kids and bring them into the game.
Jeff, you could bat, you could bowl, you were an all-rounder, you know, you did your bit with Derbyshire. There you are, it's 1976, it's the heat wave summer, it's the drought. The Oval was the colour of that beer.
Richards, it was yellow.
Yeah. Richards scored 291. They just touched the ball, it went for 4, and they had these fearsome bowlers, including a guy called Michael Holding, known as Whispering
Good
Death.
friend of mine, because he came to Derbyshire.
I know he did.
He came to play at Derbyshire. Very good friend.
But you go in as a rookie. It's 1976. We're getting thrashed for the West Indies.
Yeah.
What's it like facing Michael Holding for your first ball in Test cricket?
Well, it was the first ball in Test cricket as well. You're quite right. And I always got a wonderful story about my father, because after the Test match, I went back to him, and because he couldn't get down, he never drove, so he couldn't get down to London, so he watched it on the television, and he said to me, we're in the front room at 2 Enfield Road, Chesterfield, he said, I watched Michael Holding running into bowl at you, and I knew he was going to bowl around about 100 miles an hour. He said, and he got to 2 yards from the delivery stride, and do you know what I did, son? He said, I'll tell you what I did. I closed my eyes. And I just said, well, it must be hereditary then, because I did as well.
I love that. I love cricket stories.
That's an after-dinner line.
I love that. Well, of course, you had your time, selection.
Yeah.
You were an England selector for many, many years, chairman. Always a controversial job, isn't it? Whatever the selectors do, you're going to get condemned in the press.
Well, we were I say fortunate. We worked hard at it. You know, being a selector, there are criteria for being a selector. 1, you've got to have the time to do it properly.
Yes.
2, you've got to have the knowledge of what is required to be an international cricketer. And 3, as I felt, you had to have communication skills as well. And if you passed all those 3, then you had a chance. And it's picking the right people at the right time and conversing with them so you got the best out of them. And I think that's what's happening at the moment as well. I think there's a similar situation now.
And I think Robert Key gets left out of this. He's also been a big part of this new England setup.
He'll be quite happy to be on the back as well.
No, he does seem to be. He does seem to be. Well, no, I mean, you did all this for a long, long time. You got your OBE for your services to the game, and you are now the star of the after-dinner cricket speaking circuit. No, you are.
I do enjoy that. I do enjoy it.
How many after-dinner speeches, Jeff Miller, do you do every year?
Quite a few.
Come on, give us a number.
Quite a few. Well, it's gone down. The older I've got, I've knocked it down a bit, but I don't know, it to be about 100 or something like that.
It's still a couple of nights a week.
A lot of, as you can see, I do a lot of charity work as well.
I was going to come to that. So
I've just seen the advert in between the two, and you've got the prostate advert on as well.
Yes.
And I try to promote that as much as I can.
Jeff Miller, like the King, you have had a prostate cancer diagnosis. Do you think... I mean, I know you've got the badge, and I should wear it, actually, because I had a male cancer as well. I had testicular cancer many years ago. I should wear it too. Do you think still today there are men reluctant to come forward and get these problems?
I think, the more we try and promote it, and there's some big names have gone through that, and it's not an embarrassment anymore. We all have problems, and the older you get, they have problems, especially if it's hereditary as well. So... It's not an embarrassment to say you've got a problem with you. You need to go and get it sorted out and try and rectify it if there is a problem there. Sometimes there isn't, but there are ways of finding out whether there are or not, and don't be scared to actually go in and find out.
I was surprised that the King was as open about it as he was.
No,
I thought with the King, we'll know that the son. Yeah, I know. I just thought sort of royalty, they keep that bit of distance, but he's been very, very open about it, hasn't he?
He's promoted it. So if the King's going through that process, then what I'm doing with it is small fry in comparison with him. And so if he's actually stated it and do something about it, then the male of this world should look at that and think, that's me as well.
And actually, I mean, I know people are terribly fearful, and this word cancer terrifies everybody with good reason. But I think I'm right in saying that when it comes to prostate, if it's caught early, in the vast, vast majority of cases, it can be dealt with.
It's got me. I got mine early, and I had some wonderful, wonderful people looked after me. And I'm sure lots of people have wonderful people looking after them, but you're quite right, Nigel. If you get it early, get your measuring early, and make your decision what you think is best for you, then
Yeah, absolutely.
Why not?
Well, Jeff Miller, absolute pleasure.
It's a pleasure.
To have you on the
Pleasure,
show.
Nigel.
And it's great that cricket is back in the news.
Well,
that England are doing well. It's rather exciting, isn't it?
What we do now, what cricket is doing now, is bringing the public back into it. The ones who are enjoying watching it.
Yeah.
Because England are doing so well.
Absolutely. Well,
wonderful.
Cheers. Thank you for joining
Cheers.
me.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Now, someone that loves his cricket is the next up on this channel. And Jacob Rees-Mogg, who I always see at Lord's every year, who loves the game. He'll be very angry to have missed Jeff Miller, but he's about to do a live show from Scunthorpe. Jacob, how are things going in Scunthorpe?
Well, it's absolutely marvellous to be here in Scunthorpe, where... where I'm going to be talking about how our crazy green policies are doing such damage to our steel industry, and that we need a steel industry which is essential to the Scunthorpe economy, but actually of importance nationally.
Jacob, absolutely. Have a great time. That looks like a very enthusiastic crowd we've got for GB News up there in Scunthorpe tonight. And Jacob, of course, is quite right. All this talk of electric arc furnaces, all they do is recycle second-hand steel. We need blast furnaces to produce primary steel, because that's the steel that we need for the kind of military equipment that, God forbid, we might need to use. That's it from me. I'm back with you on Monday evening. Have a great weekend. Let's have a look and see what's the weather going to do for us.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening, I'm Alex Berkill. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast. Through the end of the week, it is going to be largely cloudy, mild, but also windy, because we have a tight pressure gradient across the UK. An area of high pressure to the south of us, leading to a westerly flow, and that westerly flow will push the heavy rain that we saw across much of Scotland through today towards the east overnight, and we are going to drag in increasing amounts of cloud from the west. So some clearer skies towards the southeast to start the night means it may start a little chilly, a touch of frost, but as the cloud rolls in, we are going to see our temperatures lifting. So by the time many of us wake up tomorrow, it's going to be quite a mild start, some places already in double figures. Otherwise, as we go through Friday, and it's a much cloudier day than today for most of us, outbreaks of rain where the cloud is thick enough, particularly towards the west, perhaps something a bit more persistent across parts of Scotland into Northern Ireland for a time. In the east, this is where we have the greatest chance of some brighter skies, and where it's going to be mildest, highs of around 14 or 15 Celsius, but you do need to factor in some strong winds, risk of gales in exposed spots, and around higher ground too. On Saturday, it's going to be a cloudier, wetter picture across southern areas, staying mild here. A bit chillier further north though, albeit with some sunny skies, and blustery showers could bring some sleet or snow over the higher ground of Scotland. Into Sunday, and I think the mild picture will become more widespread again, though it is looking quite cloudy with outbreaks of rain too. Bye-bye.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News.